regulators in England and Wales have seen a notable rise in professional misconduct complaints against lawyers tied to statements on Gaza and transgender issues. Nearly 30% more reports were made to the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and the Bar Standards Board saw a 24% rise in complaints this year, with regulators linking much of the increase to contentious political debates, especially on social media. Critics say that this highlights a tension. Lawyers, like all citizens, have personal views but are expected to uphold public trust and impartiality. Regulators insist personal beliefs must not undermine professional conduct. And opponents argue that activists are weaponising the regulatory system to punish lawyers for political speech, chilling free expression within the profession. So the key question remains, should personal opinions affect a lawyer's career, or the complaints mechanism being used as a tool to broaden the cultural disputes? Well, thankfully, we can find out the answer. We're joined by barrister and writer Steven Barrett. Thank you for joining me. Not often you get a round of applause as a lawyer. It feels weird. Are lawyers getting worse, then?
So this is part of a much broader breakdown of law and order in our country. OK, this is effectively, we have instituted mob rule. So you say, I mean, what we need is clear, simple rules that apply to everybody freely. And instead, what Tony Blair created is a system that is well open to abuse. So these complaints, first of all, you get complaints from people who've never met the lawyer in question. So it is a system that is obviously open to potential abuse. And you start to then say, well, a lawyer has a right to have a political opinion on X topic. Right. Well, then, is that lawyer going to be able to have a view on Y topic? And what mob rule does, and the reason that Tony Blair brings this in, and the reason that the so-called soft left quite like this, is that most of the mob is composed of far left people. And they will push hundreds of complaints against individual lawyers. I don't mind admitting that I had hundreds of complaints which were completely rejected by my regulator when I mocked the reports of deaths coming out of Gaza because they were from Hamas. And I don't trust Hamas because they're proscribed terrorists and monsters. So I was more than happy to laugh at monsters. I actually think laughing at monsters is quite a good policy. But anyway, I got hundreds of complaints. Yeah. Had I praised Hamas or offered public sympathy for Gaza, which would also be a political position, I wouldn't have got those complaints. And Tony Blair knew that this would happen, and it's a way of shutting down right-wing opinions. The problem is, for these geniuses who think mob rule is a good idea, is that eventually the mob will come for them. And we saw this a few weeks ago when Owen Jones tweeted something that the mob decided wasn't quite pro-trans enough. It was obviously pro-trans, but it wasn't quite pro-trans enough. So they immediately came for him. Now, he doesn't suffer one of these regulatory systems. But if he did, he would have had hundreds of complaints to his regulator about this. What we need is clear rules, known in advance, that we can enforce fairly. So if you want impartiality, we can get that back. I can draft that for you if you want.
Well, just to jump into to try and see where we're getting with all the info here, I suppose it would be a fair system if there were a mob complaining in the other direction. Like, the system itself isn't inherently the source of, according to your argument, the unfairness. The unfairness is the asymmetry of the mob.
There is a definite asymmetry of the mob. Right-wing people tend to be more decent and more restrained. That didn't last in Weimar Germany, and that's what we're mirroring.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, you could, if you wanted to track down people who made pro-Hamas comments, and lawyers, I suppose, in this case, and complain against them, the mechanism is there. The mechanism is definitely there, but this violence, this is a form of passive-aggressive behaviour. It's a form of violence. And a society will not be peaceful and stable whilst there is an awful lot of violence. So the right to responding the way the left currently behave is definitely, to my mind, not the answer. I think the answer is to have clear rules that we can effectively apply. And at the moment, and by the way, the regulators complain, but of course it benefits them. Because if I'm a regulator in a middle-ranking role and all of a sudden complaints have gone up by a huge number, then we'll have to hire more junior staff to process the complaints, and I'll have to have a promotion, thank you very much. You see how the mob and the blob become codependent. But ultimately, we as a society want more peace, less violence. And I would simply implement a clear rule of lawyer impartiality and stop people who aren't clients being able to complain. You see, that makes a lot of logical sense. I suppose my comparison would be Ofcom type things, because my job has exposed me to more of that, and the idea that people can complain about a show they've not seen, to me, seems odd. But at least, I mean, you can't measure if someone's seen a show. You could measure if someone's had no interaction with a lawyer. Yeah,
Ofcom's the perfect example of why this is mob rule, because Ofcom only ever respond based upon the volume of complaints. OK, that's an absolutely ridiculous system. OK, if a murder is committed and only one person reports it to the police should still investigate that murder and prosecute and go through because a murder was committed. You don't need... The police shouldn't be able to turn around and go, I'm sorry, hasn't reached the 10,000 people have complained yet threshold. But Ofcom will often say, oh, barely anyone's complained, so we're not going to investigate. That is an admission that this is mob rule, that the mob is in charge. And the reason, again, Ofcom is exactly the same thing as our legal regulators. We have created word soups that nobody understands. I had to look at, for reasons which will be obvious to your listeners and viewers, the 1981 British Nationality Act today, and that, over the last 30 years, has been turned into complete gibberish. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. So, trying to find any clarity of rule or what the rule is has gone from our society, and we need to get that back if we want to be a peaceful, harmonious place. Just understand what the rule is.
But I suppose another bit of pushback would be, yep, you could bring in a system that is fair, that is well described so we all understand it. That's not going to make people peaceful. If you met people, it might stop you directly complaining about the lawyer you don't like, but I'm fairly sure social media would be still as feisty as it ever was.
Well, and there may be a space for that in public life, and it may be just getting rid of the ideas that you can complain at all should go. Because in many ways, although they probably feel empowered, they are actually pretty much, infantilized, turned into children. I mean, if you get your kicks out of sending a complaint to a regulator, and then the regulator will tell you whether or not, that is a pathetically childish position to be in. You should be a grown-up, and we as a society need to start valuing grown-ups again and saying that grown-ups have, tough skin. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. The right, it's a free country. We need to get these expressions back. It's his right to his opinion, and to go about our lives in an ordered way.
Let me test your left-right bias here, just in case. So the thing you've just described would be a really good argument for letting Gary Lineker tweet whatever he wants while he's also being paid to do sport. Yeah,
and so the problem that I always run into with my position is racism. And what do you do about racism? And I think that so now I'm not saying Gary Lineker in particular, but
it's going to have to apologise for something.
You're not. But the real test for this position is racism. And I think we've just got to admit that having laws against racist speech haven't really achieved anything. I mean, the DEI industry is absolutely colossal and huge, bigger than it's ever been in my entire life, which must be a statement that racism is bigger than it's ever been in my entire life. Now, I don't believe that. But I think what we need to do is use social controls and morality, and again, get away from the idea that something is morally bad because it's illegal. So things are just morally wrong because they're morally wrong. A lot of people in this country seem to have the view that if a jury in Florida convicts the BBC, then what the BBC did will be wrong. And if a jury in Florida says the BBC isn't unlawful, then what the BBC did would be right. And I would say that is simply tosh. That we should have a moral system, and what the BBC did, whether it's illegal or legal, is morally wrong. And we need to go back to being a society that has a strong concept of morals, and that's how you deal with issues like racism. So you morally condemn racism.
But it kind of implies that we can get to some objective morality, whereas whoever's sending a complaint about a lawyer, I bet they're the hero of their own story, and they think they are doing the moral right thing.
They will do, and that is part of the problem, is this concept of subjective morality. And we need to go back to the idea of objectivity as best we can. Even if we can't get there completely, where we are now is absolutely awful, because we just have regulators who themselves don't really know what the words mean. I mean, Ofcom uses a phrase called due impartiality, and if you actually look at the definition, I mean, it's complete tosh. A thing will be impartial unless it isn't. Oh, great, thanks, Ofcom, that's really helpful. An orange shall be an orange except when it's an apple. Great. These are fantastic.
I suppose regulators don't want specificity in their language. It gives them the wiggle room that they might want.
Well, if you were a cynic, you'd say that the blobbiness, the flabbiness, creates room for more employment and more money. And all the regulators, well, the minute you create a regulator, the minute you create a bureaucracy, all a bureaucracy is going to do is grow. I mean, that's literally what's happening. So the reason that they probably don't like me is not because of any opinion I have, other than the fact that I would sack them all and get rid of it and have a very clear system of law. And once you have clear laws, again, again, this is about turning us all into grown-ups again, because I think we should be grown-ups. We're citizens. We've got the vote. You know, we are. This is our country. Once you return to simplified laws, ordinary people become the mechanism of enforcement. And I give this example. So Suella Braverman has spoken publicly that in her mind the hate marches, which are allegedly pro-Palestine, crossed the legal limits and could have been blocked. To my mind, they crossed the legal limits and could have been blocked. But I can guarantee you right now, for balance, or whatever Ofcom calls it, you could get a lefty KC who will come on and say, Stephen's completely wrong, Suella's completely wrong, they don't meet the legal threshold. Where does that leave your audience? Where does that leave your listeners and viewers? It leaves them either trusting me and Suella on some sort of nebulous basis, like he's got long hair, or he's genuinely, he's kind to puppies, or it leaves them trusting the lefty lawyer because, he's always on our side and he's on our team. Ultimately, if you make the test so simple that everyone could understand it, you'd be able to read it and go, yeah, I think it does meet the legal test. Yep. Or, nope, don't think it does, Stephen's wrong. And we need to get our laws back to being so simple, because they are your...
Then that is not having a moral test, it's having a legal test, which I think legality stands in for the objective morality, because everyone's subjective. You're talking about bias. You pick the side that's saying the thing you agree with and go, well, that sounds good to me. Whereas you need something that can hold you up against it sometimes.
Often, I would like both morality and law back into the system. So I think law is breaking down because it has too many words and nobody understands it, and it's been taken away from ordinary people and sent over to people like me. And very few of us have the courage to admit that it's gibberish, because to do so is sort of inviting the allegation that you're a bad lawyer. Thankfully, I'm old enough and ugly enough and established enough that nobody's really going to have any purchase to, I'm sure people will try, but turning around and going, Stephen's just a bad lawyer, that's why he doesn't understand the Communications Act 2003. No, absolute tosh.
I guarantee there'll be a tweet saying that.
Well, I bet there will be. But we also, at the same time, need a collective vision of morality back. Yeah. And that doesn't, we can't go to the extremes on anything. Too much law would be an oppressive tyranny. There's such a thing called lawful evil. Yeah. Too much morality would get stifling as well. That's, we don't want to be absolutely perfect all the time. There's no comedy if we're always good.
Yeah, and we've run out of time. I could do a 2-hour podcast with you on this. I love this as a topic. We didn't even get to mention your jumper, but thank you very much to barrister and writer Steven Barrett.